I'm starting the broadcast now. And let's see here. I lost the Facebook Live thing. Chat, invite.
I've got it.
You got it? Okay, you got that taken care of, Nick. Thank you. And we are recording. I think we're recording, Nick. Seems like we are. Yep.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So, hey, everyone. Welcome to this podcast. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. I am super excited today to share this conversation with you with my good friend, Rodney Walker. And as many of you know, Rodney is one of the featured entrepreneurs in the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. And you're going to get to hear firsthand about how an entrepreneurial mindset intervened on his life trajectory, like kind of where he started, how this entrepreneurial experience kind of altered the trajectory of his life. And so before we do that, I want to just a quick background about who we are. As I said, I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We are an organization dedicated to entrepreneurial mindset education programs, professional development, and curricula. We serve individuals, organizations, and academic institutions worldwide. That's what we do. So in my role as the founder of ELI, as the Chief Executive Officer of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, I am keenly fascinated with how underdogs win. I mean, that's really what our work is all about. And I've spent about the last 10 or 12 years going around the world interviewing what I'll call underdog entrepreneurs or unlikely entrepreneurs. It's really those who have no particular advantage in life, yet somehow manage to alter their the course or trajectory of their life, alter their position in the socioeconomic structure. So that's really where my fascination lies, and that's where our work is really in that domain. So in that quest, that's how I ran into Rodney Walker. We were launching the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program with initial support from the Kauffman Foundation, and it was some folks at Kauffman that introduced me to Rodney Walker, who at the time, and Rodney, you can stop me if I'm mistaken here, but I think it was 2010. It was June or so of the summer of 2010. My memory serves me, you were then a rising junior at Morehouse College, and you were doing some work as like an internship for Arne Duncan in Washington, D.C. And I think that's, you're muted, Rodney. Rodney, you're muted. Can't hear you. There you go.
Yeah.
Good.
I was a summer after my sophomore year at Morehouse College. I had joined an organization called the Institute for Responsible Citizenship in DC, and I was working at the Department of Education under Arne Duncan at the time.
Okay, great. So, Rodney, you know, a lot of the folks on this webinar are probably familiar with your story. A lot of them are Ice House, certified Ice House facilitators, but not everyone is familiar with your story. So, and I'm just sort of recalling that when I first met you in DC in that summer of June of 2010, you provided a video that you had made to kind of set the stage for your background, where you came from, and like what your early childhood was like. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to ask you to share that video with our audience to just start this conversation to help folks understand like where your journey in life began.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, and first of all, let me just thank you for allowing me to come on on this podcast. Obviously, it's an honor. I appreciate it. I've always been a fan of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, the Ice House program. You know, it's been, like I said, a decades-long relationship, so I really appreciate that. The video that we shared back in 2010, as the video that I'm about to share now, which is in 2016, actually speaks to the evolution of from where we were in 2010 to where I then, ended up in 2016. And so it all worked very, like, it's a real beautiful manifestation. But it does speak to, again, like the narrative of where I had came from to ultimately where I'd evolved over time. And so, I'm happy to share kind of like that narrative of where it is, of where I went, and kind of how it's led me over the years to be where I am today, having graduated from Harvard and Yale and just being able to do the work that I do today. So
Rodney, before we start,
mm-hmm.
I missed a step here, and I want to just press pause for just a second and just ask everyone and just kind of set the stage for this conversation. You and I are going to have a conversation, maybe about 30 minutes or so, but I want to open this up to the audience. We've got, quite a large audience here. People around the world are tuned into this webinar to hear this story. And I wanted to let folks know to please go into the chat function on Zoom and just say hello and let us know who you are and where you're from, so we can just kind of start, and so Rodney can understand like kind of where people are coming from. I see Daniel Barwick from Independence, Kansas. Dan, it's great to see you on this. Natasha from Thomasville, North Carolina is here. Jamie from Daytona Beach. Yeah, see, my more panelists, someone from Cleveland here. Great. Rhoda, I'm not going to be able to keep up with this now. There's Kentucky, Wilmington, North Carolina. There's a lot of folks in North Carolina. A lot of love for Rodney in North Carolina right now. Rodney, I think you know that there's a big statewide initiative with the Ice House program there. So yeah, Priya from St. Joseph, Michigan, Eastern North Carolina is Kimberly. Hey, okay, great. James Davis from West Virginia. Jim Davis attended Ice House training a few years ago. Dr. Robert Green, Burlington, North Carolina. So North Carolina's definitely overrepresented here. Hey, it's Bill Shutters. There's a familiar friend there. Roswell, New Mexico. Okay, so lots of folks chiming in here. Rodney, this is happening faster than I can read off the names. Wanted to say welcome to everyone. You can use the chat function to ask questions, or there's a Q&A. You can raise your hand. What I'd like you to do is hold the questions for about the first 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the conversation. So, Rodney, I apologize for that brief interruption. Please go ahead and if you can share the video that you were talking about.
Okay, so first to do that, I think I need, so you have to stop sharing your screen and I can share my screen till I get
Okay, I just stopped sharing.
Alrighty, and okay.
There we go.
Hi, my name is Rodney Walker, and what you just saw was just a short summary of my life. I would like to take you on a journey and share a little bit more about my story with you today. I'm the byproduct of parents who were born and raised in Chicago's public housing projects, a mother who met her father for the first time at 12 years old and was raped and abused by him shortly thereafter, a mother who followed in her mother's footsteps and had her first child at 13 years old, a mother who lost her brother to 2 shots to the head with a sawed-off shotgun, one of the most brutal gang homicides in Cabrini's history. My mother, understandably, suffered from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and was a cocaine addict as a result. My father was raised by a single mother, a mother who worked in the evenings as a bartender, and as a result, he was consumed by the streets. He eventually dropped out of high school, enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1968, went to Vietnam, came home with an aggressive heroin addiction after seeing bodies blown apart. He couldn't keep a job. He was eventually incarcerated for selling drugs on the street. So in the real way, this was my blueprint, my foundation, my grounding. I came into foster care at 5 years old. And from the age 5 to 17, I've been in 12 different foster homes. I have 4 stories. I've experienced a lot of abuse in foster care. I've had breakdowns and episodes of depression from knowing that I had 9 of the siblings who I didn't have the privilege of growing up with. And I was homeless at 17 years old, couch surfing over friends' places, and in shelters for a few months. So it shouldn't surprise you that my education was the least of my priorities, given all this instability in my life. And the sad reality is that my story was and still is the status quo, which should scare all of us. But as we continue to find solutions to all these layers, let me briefly share with you the ingredients that helped me to overcome my adversity and how I use my adversity to my success. So, near the end of high school, 2 important things happened to change the course of my life. Now, I couldn't learn and grow because there were too many emotional problems that was holding me back. My parents were drug addicts. I was being beat by foster parents. I was stripped from my original birth family, and I felt like no one was listening to me. But then I found a mentor who was the dean of my high school 1 year, and he helped me understand the importance of my trauma and the devastating impact that it had on my life and my learning. He was a passionate and a fierce and tenacious leader, and to this day, he is still central to my life. His mentorship program changed my reality forever. Another critical turning point for me was an entrepreneurship organization that I joined in my senior year called the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, or NIFTY. This is an organization that was supported by Invest for Kids. And in this organization, I learned how to build a business in my senior year of high school. And in building that business, I learned the importance of an entrepreneurial mindset and using entrepreneurialism to find the ways to deal with life's complex problems. This innovative thinking really served to my benefit. And so with the combination of lifelong mentorship and economic opportunity, really provided me with the vehicle that I needed to begin real healing. And as a result, I'm the first in my family to graduate from high school, the first in my family to graduate from Morehouse College, and obtain a graduate degree from Yale University. I've written a book on my journey called A New Day One. And since doing that, I've had the opportunity to travel and to learn about the importance of trauma and how it affects and impacts youth all across our country. So in conclusion, I would like to say that there have been many investments made in my life. And the best way I can describe the impact of those investments is this way. In the end, nothing about my life is fixed. I still live with the horrors of violence and poverty and social failure just as I did in 2008. My parents are still drug addicts. My family is still torn apart. And my world is still broken. My high school still produces a 50% dropout rate. And the homicide rate in my community continues to climb. Sadly, most kids in our system will not make it. But many others are, and it's because of the dedication and the perseverance of the organizations you're supporting today and in the past. So thank you for your investment in Chicago's youth. You got to turn your mute button off.
Unmute myself. Good. You can hear me okay now, Rodney. Okay. So sorry about that, Rodney. Thank you for sharing that video. I mean, it just impacted me again the way it did 10 years ago. And that's how our conversation began 10 years ago. Rodney, in our first interview in Washington, D.C. in 2010. So, I just want to pick the conversation up there. I mean, you're obviously facing so many challenges in your life as a young man. in 12 different foster homes, ultimately homeless. I think I heard that at some point you were actually trying to wash your clothes in the men's room of the high school. Like that, like you were looking at school as sort of some kind of a safe haven. It was like a warm building and the lights were on, and there was like, you know, it was some kind of a place that you looked to for shelter, I guess.
Absolutely. And it was all a manifestation of all these different complex dynamics coming together. So it wasn't just that, you know, I had these tough issues in foster care, which then led me to run away and then to experience homelessness and then find my parents and then experience homelessness again after not being able to cope with the reality of the environment. It's not just that. It's really, it's a complex system also of the ecosystem or the microsystem that was around me, and my school system being inadequate, violence and poverty manifesting in my neighborhood, and then of my lack of exposure to the world around me that can really help alleviate some of those barriers to entry. Because it's not that just that the resources or the intervention wasn't there, it's just that I wasn't in the psychological, social space or place to be able to have that outreach, and vice versa, by the way, for that outreach to reach me, to be able to like kind of quell that friction. So what you get is an individual like myself and many others who go to the school to get proper shelter, resources, food, you know, and things like that, just to try to cope with the adverse reality that they're living in. And these are the stories that's not told for obvious reasons. But I think that when life kind of gives you that kind of gravity, that's exactly what happens, is that we kind of turn to these those little glimmers of hope in our communities, where we can kind of see some type of, we can have some type of reference to step back and process and do something productive and constructive. Versus like the coping mechanism, which is what we do often, which is something self-destructive to be able to survive and to be able to survive whatever it is that we're going through. And that's really unfortunate, because the longer you stay in this survival mechanism, that survival mind state and survival mechanism, the more that informs and transforms the very social subconscious that you have. So when you see a kid like acting out in class, when you see them running out of class, showing up late, when they always come to school with some type of mental or social or physiological illness, it's a manifestation of having held on to that coping mechanism for way too long. And as a result of holding on to it, it becomes them. And so as it becomes them, everything that attracts that which they are then consumes them. So now you get incarceration, now you get homelessness, now you get kind of the same cycle of poverty over and over again, why no intervention is really allowed to be able to do the job, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a lot of ways like there's some modicum of like stability in school. Like in the world outside was like so chaotic, so violent, so just unpredictable. The school building represented some modicum of security or stability, if I understand you correctly.
Oh, absolutely.
But at the same time, like I want like people to understand like that you know, you weren't a great student. I mean, you said it in the video. You were struggling to kind of keep up. Like, it's not that you were thriving academically. The physical building, the facilities represented stability, but school wasn't the place that you were thriving, if I understand you correctly.
Right, it wasn't. And not to say that school wasn't, you know, obviously it wasn't a sustainable and successful vehicle for that kind of growth and learning that I needed. It's just like the gravity of the community and everything, my microsystem, my immediate microsystem that was impeding on my learning. So now I was diagnosed with autism when I was 5 years old, a form of autism called Asperger's syndrome. So my learning, even though it was cognitively challenged in that way, didn't speak to why my grades were so poor as I got older. That spoke more to the social emotional trauma that I was experiencing early on, which, you know, like the school system helped, but it couldn't necessarily alleviate, you know, the pain and the frustration I was feeling from my own immediate situation and circumstances. Yeah.
So I remember you said something in our first conversation, 2010, Rodney, and this is in the Ice House program, this video clip from you, but I want to read it here to. You said something that struck me very profoundly. You said, I always had the notion that there were two sides of life. Those who were wealthy and those who weren't. Those who were fortunate and those who weren't. I felt like it wasn't in the cards for me. Can you say more about that? That's I think that's a powerful statement there about your frame of mind as a young man growing up on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. You know, you often hear me saying a lot now, but I even believe it then that listen, in inner cities like Chicago on the south or the west side, especially in neighborhoods like Inglewood or North Lawndale, the poverty and the world around you is so adverse to the way the world should be that it literally makes you lose hope. And I remember even when I said it in 2010 in college, I felt like there was just this huge disparity between those who had wealth and prosperity and those who had poverty and misfortune and dysfunction. And basically where I was in that realm, I felt like it just wasn't in the cards for me to actually attain that. And that there's so many layers to that, but by and large, it's just that I almost felt like at a certain point, life was happening to me in ways that I just couldn't avoid. Because again, it's like left and right, every time I looked up, something bad was happening. And there was nothing I could really do about it. No matter how much I tried to think about it or think my way out of trouble, it's like trouble always found me. And that had to do with a lot of different things. But by and large, if you take this idea that life is 90 to 95% subconscious and 5 to 10% conscious, if you tell me that my conscious environment and experiences was producing a negative outlook and negative experiences, and that 5% or 10% energy that I was going to was surviving that versus trying to create an adverse and opposite world beyond that, then I'm literally would set myself up for failure over and again. It didn't matter where I was. And college was just used as another vehicle to perpetuate that poverty because I was in college not knowing why I was there. I remember us talking about this in 2010. I was in college not even knowing what I was in college for, but only because I was perpetuated a narrative by my educators that I need to go to school in order to get off the south side of Chicago. That's exactly what I did. I got out of the south side of Chicago. I went to Morehouse, inherited something like $20,000 in loans within the first 2 semesters of school, and didn't even know why I was there. So it's like running away from the very same thing that was going to put me back in that was still a manifestation that was waiting to happen. So again, that to me, spoke to just the gravity of where I was and that hopelessness and that defeated mentality. I had to really learn that over the years and over time to be able to get where I am today, because I hadn't even learned it even after I left the south side of Chicago. It was a process of transformation that had to happen eventually.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, Rodney. I want to come back to that about being in Morehouse, racking up debt, everyone telling you that's the way out. And you sort of said you sort of just accepted that, but you didn't really own it yet. You hadn't really understood where you were going, what river you were in, and where that river was headed. You were just kind of going down the river. But what I want to get to first, Rodney, is the story about like this entrepreneurial experience you had and how that, it's really, it's not at all fair to say it was just the entrepreneurial mindset intervention. It was the entrepreneurial experience combined with the power of a strong mentor. And we'll talk about both of those things, the powerful combination of both of those things. But I want to start with like your reaction, the epiphany or the aha moment you had as a result of your entrepreneurial experience. What was that in 10th grade? I've forgotten now. 10th grade?
I was a junior in high school, actually.
Okay, so you're in 11th grade and you stumbled into this entrepreneurship class. And you talk a little bit about how that experience shifted your perspective.
Right. So one day when I was a junior in high school in the second semester, I never forget, like literally what made my wheels to start spinning. I seen one of my classmates come in with a big check. It was a big check. I think it was like $3,500, more money than a lot of us had seen in that school ever. She had won a competition. I think she came in second place, actually. And it was incredible. I think that when I saw that, I was like, first of all, where did she get that from? Who gave it to her? And what is she doing? Because I want to do that. Because right now, I know when I'm going to go home, I'm going to a lot of trouble and no money. So that was just my interest. When I got to the actual orientation of this entrepreneurship course, the question was asked, what would it mean to you to do something that you're extremely passionate about, that you're extremely talented at, and something that you can build a business around and make money, and make money from it. And, for me, it was just like a no-brainer. What do I sign up?
Yeah.
And so that really was what sparked my interest. And that was the interest turner. In terms of like the epiphany turner of the entrepreneurial mindset, that didn't come until after I was fully immersed in the program. I had been in that program for about 6 weeks, learning about all the aspects of business development. I had created a business from an idea that I had, and put together like the mechanics of learning it. Once I put together the business plan and I began practicing in front of my peers and educators and mentors, then that's when it became like almost like a psychological reprogramming or reframing, because I was literally doing it and thinking about it and practicing it all the time until it just literally consumed me. And that's when I began to put to practice what I was learning over that 6-week period is market analysis and product development and, capitalization, optimization, and all those type of things. And so that's when I did that. I built the business in high school. I ran it in high school. I made money from it in high school, just not a lot of money. But I created all these aliases for different hats that needed to be worn in the business, because I started off by myself and the business partner. But all these different aspects I did myself. So learning how all these different aspects navigated, from the project, from the business manager to the HR person, to the accounts receivable, the secretary, all that kind of stuff. I learned these things in real time, doing this at such a young age that by the time I got to Morehouse and I was still running it, I had basically perfected the learning of these systems to where I can just be able to be fluid in my entrepreneurial thinking. And it became so easy to be able to apply it to other areas of my learning and my growth over time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So Rodney, is what you're saying, like, once you were like pursuing your own interests, like something that you were interested in, passionate about, you could see a way to make money with it, like that set you on a path of like learning how to learn?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's, I mean, I think that's a summary of what you just said. It's like you're figuring out what you need to figure out.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Because the outcome that you're striving towards is you value the outcome and you see this pathway that it's possible. Right?
Yeah. Most people value the outcome with an adverse pathway. That's what entrepreneurship education to me fixes. It's that I want to be successful. I want to be wealthy. I want to be prosperous. I want to live in a good neighborhood. I want to be psychologically, socially, and physiologically safe. I want my family to be okay. I want to take care of the people I love and care about. But the pathway to that is adverse, because subconsciously and consciously, all you know is what you know. So think about a person in Inglewood who is coming from an environment that literally psychologically and socially informs him that selling drugs on the street is how you get money, which is then how you support and love the people you care about. It buys you time to care about the people you care about, not more than just support them. It buys you time. Wealthy people, just like a lot of rich people, especially in this type of environment, it gets to a point where the money is not just for the money. The money buys you something that you can't get back once you went too far, which is time. Right. So if I know that this is going to be the most immediate outlet to me, be able to get the immediate resources and capital allocation that I need to be able to spend time with my son or my daughter or my father or my mother, then I'm going to do that. So this is kind of like that adverse pathway that I'm talking about. What entrepreneurship education did, that was literally reframe and reorient how I can legitimately put a business infrastructure in place, both mentally and practically, to be able to produce something sustainable over the long term. And that's exactly what I did. So it was almost like I would have gotten to entrepreneurship in one way or another. I would have learned it in the streets, or I probably would have learned it in the classroom. It just so happened that Nifty was, my school was one of, I want to say 25 to 30 schools in the city of Chicago that had this entrepreneurship program where African-American, Latino students can actually learn entrepreneurship the right legitimate way, to be able to put them on a productive, streamlined path to success in this way versus the way we would have probably adversely learned it in our respective neighborhoods, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I got it. So, you said something else in our first interview, Rodney, that you said entrepreneurship more than anything makes academics relevant to a person's life. You can do anything you want and apply entrepreneurship to it. And you also said you cannot practice entrepreneurship without the mindset. But there are a lot of educators on this webinar, and Rodney, and so could you sort of speak to what you meant with like the entrepreneurship? Because you said like once you, I think, and I don't have the direct quote in front of me well, I do. As a matter of fact, you said all my life I thought I could not learn. I thought everyone was so much smarter than me. And boy, like I can identify with that. The day I got all A's, I knew I could become a scholar. I apply the same entrepreneurial mindset. Somebody understood it. And if they understood it, I can understand it. I mean, that's a direct quote from you in 2010. Can you elaborate on that for educators, the entrepreneurship educators that might be struggling to articulate the power of entrepreneurship education?
Yeah, absolutely. I learned that my greatest gift was learning that my deficiency or my difficulty or my challenge was not cognitive; it was social emotional. So, and I believe this to be true about 75% of young people, especially in the public school system, is that it's not the inability to learn from a cognitive development standpoint; it's the inhibition to learn, the lack of ambition to learn given the social, emotional, and psychological constraints. So once I had a mentor who literally poured life into me by reversing and psychologically reprogramming all the trauma and the adversity that happened in my life through a program that really aimed to challenge and reframe my adversity, coupled with an entrepreneurship program that let me know this is formal education, which is going to teach you skill sets that you'll need later on in life to be successful. However, this is another form of education where you can truly learn about the business of optimizing your life experience through that which you're passionate and talented at, right? Those two things in combination built up the competence, the confidence, the self-esteem, and the questioning mentality that's necessary to be able to reverse bad grades in school, so to speak. Because I mentioned this a lot, which is that I never wanted to fail, but subconsciously I always expected to fail. And so I always failed. And so when I always failed, I would say 10% of me was disappointed, but 90% of me was satisfied subconsciously, because it's like, oh yeah, this is what I do. I fail. And all of my teachers and parents over the years affirmed that failure. Like, oh, well, he's autistic. He's dealing with Asperger's syndrome. He doesn't know how to socialize. He doesn't know how to ask for help. Like, he doesn't know these things. So of course he's not gonna do well. So that was like kind of that narrative over and over in my brain that kind of, it over time removed that depression and that guilt and that frustration that I felt from not being able to achieve, to then giving me that sense of calm and complacency from being able to fail. Right. It's only when I had a true radical mentorship program that made me question everything, and then make me go back to the recess of that time in my life that was so traumatized and traumatic, that made me say, this is really what's impeding on your ability to grow. And so when you accept and own this aspect of your life, the trauma, the adversity, the people telling you can't, the people telling you what you can't do, then that's when you're going to be able to put in the willpower that you need to be able to turn things over for the better. Now, those A's and B's that I got my last year of high school didn't happen overnight. It was literally a process of transformation through attempting to try something that I was told I shouldn't bother to try because I wasn't smart enough. So once I actually dispelled that, then I was able to make a positive difference in my life. And that stuff, affirmation, self-affirmation, and affirmation from the people you care about, ultimately is what makes or breaks you over the years. And that was just my reality going through high school until I reached that critical point, that breaking point that allowed me to think otherwise.
Yeah. So you said a lot there, Rodney, but you're talking about like not only the external dialogue, like what other people are telling you, but the story you're telling yourself. Like if both of those are just overwhelmingly negative, I mean, you just really don't have a chance.
Right. And let me just bring that a little bit further. Like the first God you know, before you know of whatever God that we've prescribed in the universe, or, you know, whatever we call him, the first God you know is your parents. You don't know God, Jesus, you don't know any God at all. So the first God you see when you wake up is your parents. So if they are telling you, you know, you can't be this, this is not in your nature, you're not meant to do this, you're not meant to do that. And this is the story they're writing from the time you're born to the time you're 16 or 17 years old, especially when the cognitive development meets the hormonal development, the hormones being responsible for your social and emotional state at 13 years old. So now you're going into your teenage, the prime years of your life, believing in the story that your first gods, your parents wrote. Yeah. Oh, to reverse that is unless you have the most radical leader, is nearly impossible. So you have to have a radical form of mentorship to be able to dismantle these notions over the years. And that's exactly what I had to have. Now, I want to say this one thing, because while the physical manifestations of those notions were true, by the way, because I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have the acumen, I didn't have the disposition, I didn't have the posture, I didn't have the mindset, I didn't have the mood, I didn't have the projection. Like you saw me in the school, I was probably depressed, I was looking down, I was self-defeated, I was low self-esteem, whatever. So when you saw me, it made sense why someone would say that. So I needed someone to basically reframe and reorient me over the years by teaching me and mentoring me to actually do different so that I can get different. But it made sense in real time how then that story that was created for me from birth manifested the way it did, and I couldn't get anything different. That's why I'm saying it's not an indictment on the education system per se. It's more so a call for action for the most radical leader to have to step up and to do something radically different, to inform us to do something way different than what we know. Yeah.
That's good, Rodney. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about like how you collided with Michael McGrone, and tell us a little bit about that.
Michael McGrone he's powerful. He was born with the gift of being able to reach people through the lens of his life experience. And everybody's, from in my book, in his book, The Twists and Turns of Possibility, we've talked about how his life literally was the blueprint for being able to help psychologically, socially, and emotionally reprogram and reframe young people who's going through adverse experiences. And in that same way, my life is the same way. Everything that I've done to overcome adversity is just a blueprint to be able to psychologically and socially reframe and reprogram life as it could be for others on the South Side of Chicago and everywhere else. But our encounter was a chance encounter. You got to think about that. There's thousands of public schools in Chicago, and I just happened to have been the one in the school where he was hired to be able to run this radical program, which was a rites of passage program. And he asked all the right questions when he came to my school. He never came in with the presumption that we couldn't learn, but that there was something impeding on our learning. And so he ran a social emotional session mentorship program that helped us to be able to dismantle and question all those things that led us up to that point. We were in detention, suspension. We were suspended every other week. We were in detention every other week. Or we just had problems with acclimating to the culture and climate of the school in a positive way. So a lot of things had to happen for us to be able to be vulnerable, to break down those barriers, to be able to face those moments of impact and those post-traumatic stressful experiences over the years. And then to be able to psychologically and socially and emotionally own it so that we can then forgive ourselves and forgive other people. And then from that forgiveness, move towards doing something radically different from what we've been doing over the years. His program in doing that, I think was profound, and it was very instrumental. I know we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but it was a process of transformation that I think was really, really valuable. That was the precedent, by the way. That was the foundation for everything that happened after that. So we talk about Nifty and entrepreneurship. Even though those programs happened at the same time, so to speak, that breaking point that I experienced in that mentorship program set the stage for all of the other interventions to truly grab hold and manifest, right? So, and I don't mean just like external programs like NIFTY, like the entrepreneurship program. I mean teachers, I mean the math teacher in the math class, the social studies teacher in the social studies class, the history teacher, the geography teacher, the algebra teacher, the school counselor who's preparing you for college, the principal who's preparing, you know, like all these different intervention methods worked once I had that breaking point in this mentorship program. Then when they were allowed to do what they were allowed to do. So I thought that was right.
You said something really, really interesting in there, Rodney. I want you to see if we can unpack it. But like, you said something about you had to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine that when you're in like what you described as like this survival mode, that's kind of the last thing you want to do is be vulnerable, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, so that's really the paradox or the challenge. It's like, in order to have that breakthrough, you got to find some kind of a place in a vulnerability, which is nearly impossible. You talked about Michael McGrone had you write a letter. Can you talk about that? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let me talk about the vulnerability first.
Yeah.
If you like on the bridge with your friend, like if you on like this huge Golden Gate Bridge with your friends, right? And it's a bad example because everybody knows it's a bad idea, but if you can just run with the analogy. If your friend is like on that bridge with you and he said, hey, we've got to jump off into the water. You know, I've done this 100 times. You know, this would be great. And any average person would probably be like, you know, I'm not going to risk my life like that. I mean, if I jump off this bridge, I'm surely going to die. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll go first. And then without even hesitation, he just jumps. And so in the immediate moment, you're like, oh my God, my friend just killed himself. And then he just gets up, he rises out of the water and say, guys, it's great. You know, come in or whatever. Yeah. Or like somebody jumping into a fire pit or somebody walking over fire or whatever, or somebody walking over ashes. Like, oh my God, this is great. So in terms of the vulnerability piece, we were made to be vulnerable because he led by example. He did that. It's not enough to just tell a young person, talk to me about that moment, the worst day in your life. Like, talk to me about what that was like. Was it when your mom died? Was it when your father went to jail? Was it when your mom was strung out on drugs and she was incarcerated or she overdosed on drugs? Was it when somebody had a shootout in the parking lot and you almost got in the crossfire? Was it like, what was it? It's not enough to do that. You have to have a facilitator in place who say, guys, I know exactly where you're at. You know, I came from, the gun-toting city of Gary, Indiana, with all these different barriers. You know, my father died at 18 of a massive stroke. And, I never got over that. I was angry. I went to jail a couple of times. My brother put a sawed-off shotgun to my head, almost, killed me, ended my life. You know, his unrelenting willingness to be vulnerable without hesitation then allowed us to say, well, if he can be vulnerable and humiliate, quote unquote, himself by sharing the deepest parts of himself, oh, well, then this must be something to that. So, and he's strong today, so must be something to that. So that's the vulnerability piece. In terms of the writing exercise, go back to the point where I was saying, what's the worst day of your life? And everybody's going to give a different answer, but you can't give the answer without psychologically and socially taking yourself back to that space. So this activity was about going back to the point in time of your life that really was the worst experience you've ever had. And then talking yourself through that moment in the way that you didn't before because you were so focused on surviving and coping and not self-destructing. This gave us like a space to be able to revisit that moment in time, to be able to do what should have been done then, which is to prepare ourselves to overcome it versus to harden it, versus to just do what we did naturally, which was to, make it harder or harden it for the sake of self-preservation. But in hardening it, what it did was it produces a social and emotional hemorrhage that's allowing us to self-destruct because it's cancer in the body, maybe not physically, but socially and emotionally. So everything that we do in the day-to-day lives, which is skip class, we're sick all the time, we're dismissive, we're disruptive, we're dysfunctional, is the manifestation of having not dealt with the wounds that you can't see. So this activity allowed us the space to be able to say, wait, back up, talk about that, write it down, What did it look like? What did it feel like? Who was there? What happened? What didn't happen? What do you wish would have happened? And then finally, what would you say to that person who went through that experience today, to be able to let them know that everything's going to be okay? And then that's what I did. And from that, it was like my Goodwill Hunting moment. It's like I grieved uncontrollably from the writing to that 13-year-old who experienced that trauma. And from writing it and to be able to expel it, I had a choice to make in that moment, which is to forgive or to not forgive. And obviously forgiveness being the choice that it has to be, I chose to forgive, chose to own, and then to be able to psychologically put myself in the space to go forward and do something radically different. So this is all deliberate choice making, given what you know, versus letting the subconscious overpower you and allow you to continue to destroy your life in ways that you can't control. And so that's to me was the most powerful part about that experience of writing about that.
What I hear you say here, Rodney, is that one of the keys here, I want to make sure we don't miss this, is that this message or this process was facilitated by a mentor who had suffered much of the same or similar trauma. And it was a man that was now like fully functioning in life, had overcome all this. So it was a trusted, not only a trusted, but what psychologists would call a relatable social model. Yeah. Somebody you admired, but it wasn't just a do-gooder trying to tell you what to do. It was someone who had lived a lot of the same.
Yeah, it's a cardiovascular surgeon dealing with heart surgery. It's a neurological surgeon dealing with a brain trauma, with a brain injury. It's that. It's not just the expertise and the skill set that mattered. It was the fact that it was the experience over a sequential period of time that induced an amount of trust within the student body, right? His blueprint, his foundation, his profile allowed us the space to say, he has to know what he's talking about. You can't go through that and have been through that and has been trained in this way and has had this much success and have this type of knowledge and practitioners, certification, so to speak, to be able to not know what he's doing. So that element of trust is there. In the same way you walk into an office, and you have a brain tumor and you have a surgeon who's been in the field for over 25 years, who've treated patients year in and year out, who has 5-star, all that. Oh yeah, you're going to still be afraid, but you're going to be more confident than not that person is going to be able to do the job because he's done it many times over. So that's what that was.
Gotcha.
A lot of notion, by the way, is put on this, because I want to make sure I'm being as frank about this as possible. You have like this race element of it, by the way. We had an African-American mentor who actually came into my school with this type of, this pedigree. Not only was he African-American educated, but he was from Gary, Indiana, and he had the profile that I described earlier. So race, by and large, with him being an African-American male, extremely helped, especially in our context, because you understood the social, political, and economic constraints that have been put on my community over the years, and how that psychologically and subconsciously informs our relationship to white people in general. I'm just gonna just put it in to be frank. But race is not the only end in and of itself. So it's not to say that he couldn't have done what he did if he wasn't a white woman or a white male in particular, because with that pedigree and with that experience, with that compassion and with that empathy, he still would have been able to do the job, and he would have been able to do it effectively, and he would have still been able to have the transformative effect that he had. It's just that by him being so relatable, especially on the race piece, that it happened quicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
I think that optical identity, I want to make sure this is very clear. Optical identity has the opportunity to expedite a transformational process, if that makes sense. It could be the difference between 1 month and 2 months. In the same way, if your doctor, your surgeon, who's a heart surgeon, by the way, who's treated 1,000 patients successfully, came in with some, with a ball cap on, saying the Nationals cap, with some sunglasses and a toothpick in his mouth, whatever, and in a nice casual suit, and he didn't have the jacket on. He said, "Look, guys, I'm gonna make sure this happens really quick, and I got my doctors around me, so let's just get this done with." The first thing is you're gonna think about is, first of all, surgeons don't dress like that. So I might need some time to process this. And then you'll
Right.
process it. And then you'll just have to go back to the facts. Man, he's actually been successful at treating 1,000 different patients over the last 25 years or whatever. I think I can trust him. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't, so that's what that is. But the optics makes perfect sense, but it's not everything. My point is to say, like, the optics make sense, but it's absolutely not everything.
Yeah, you got to look a little bit beyond what's on the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think another point I want to make, and we're going to move on to open up for questions here, Rodney. But it's if I'm hearing you like it's sort of like the model of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like they figured out in the 1930s, like, people are dropping dead in the streets from alcoholism, and the counselors struggle to help, jailers can't help, the like psychiatrists, hospitals, they don't know what to do. What they figured out is the best person to help a recovering drug addict or alcoholic is somebody who's recovered from drugs and alcohol. And I think that's what you found in a mentor, is someone that's recovered from the same trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's
his ability to empathize. And empathy is something that you can't fake. It's something that you cannot fake empathy. And empathy is a necessary condition to be able to have a transformative impact. I couldn't have had to do that, to have that goal. I couldn't have had a mentor who couldn't empathize. Not to say that you need empathy for anything else, but to do this transformative work, to convince somebody that the things that they went through in their life is the end of a new beginning, right? Like to convince them that this is a fuel for greatness. Like, you will get through this, and not only will you get through it, but you'll overcome it and triumph. And despite of it, you need someone who could be able to empathize with your experiences, right? I have no idea what it means to have a miscarriage, but I can't talk to you about a miscarriage. I've never had it. I can tell you that it's going to get better. I can tell you you're going to be stronger from it. But in the gravity of a miscarriage, you need someone who's been through it, right? And in the gravity of someone who's been shot in their body, and they land in the hospital from gunshot wounds. It helps to have somebody who's actually been shot multiple times over to say, this is the worst experience. I lost 100 pounds. I was on my deathbed, I felt like, but you know what? Now I'm better and I'm stronger. And this is what you can do today. It just makes perfect sense to be able to put somebody in the space who can empathize with someone like that, to be able to give them the life that they need, right? You need to have somebody who's dying to have a subject who's been through death to be able to give them life. Again, it just makes sense. And that's exactly what my mentor had. He was a person who experienced death in this way, in the same way that I was feeling it when I was 17 years old, to speak life to me so natural and fluently. He didn't have to force it. He didn't have to convince me why he was qualified, why he could do the job. It's just his presence and his existence and his ability to empathize alone allowed me to say, I hope to be as strong as this guy soon, and I hope to be great one day after that, right? And that's exactly what ended up happening. All he needed in his process was the commitment, the conviction, and the time and the space that he could sacrifice in order to get us to that point. Because unless he gave us those ingredients, it wouldn't have worked. You can't basically put yourself in a position to be an example for somebody that they need you to be, but then not give them the time. Because if you don't give them the time, then they're not going to be able to, they won't be able to absorb. That's the thing. So
So Rodney, I'm going to ask you one last question, and then let folks kind of chime in here. I'm sure they're eager to ask their own questions. But so you have this entrepreneurial experience, which sort of allows you to see a path where you can actually do something you enjoy doing, you're good at doing, you can make money doing it. You see that as sort of a pathway. You've got a mentor that's encouraging you, to helping you overcome the trauma, to be vulnerable, overcome the trauma, and kind of reverse the detrimental psychological, sociological, psychological impact. And you figured out you can learn. And so, you went from like not good grades at all in high school. You got in Morehouse. You figured out how to sort of apply this discipline to learning. And where has that taken you, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, it's taken me in it's taken me in incredible ways. A lot of it is I can attribute to just that I work hard, but then a lot of it I can just attribute it to the law of attraction. Orientation means a lot in this world in terms of what you attract and what your energy perpetuates over the long term. So in the beginning, I went to Morehouse not knowing what I wanted to do. I was just going just to give me a new space to be able to be safe, to be able to learn, to be able to grow, and to do something different. My mentors, my first mentor being Mr. McGrone, really put me in the space to be humble, to forgive, to own my experiences, to be compassionate, and to be willing to accept and embrace mentorship from others, so to speak, right? To put myself in a space to be mentored, because that's a hard thing to do because it requires vulnerability, like what I was saying before. So that's when teachers found that they had a much easier time getting to me, right? It wasn't, the conversations between my teachers wasn't, oh, you need to sit down and learn. You need to like stop being so disruptive. You need to arrive to school on time. You need to, you need to, let us know when you're going to be missing school or whatever. Like just that piece became so much more fluid. I became much more participative in it because I had a purpose for why I was in school at that particular moment, which is to rebuild and reconstruct my life in a different way. So my teachers had a great time. I showed up to class every day. I stayed after school every day to talk to my teachers about stuff I didn't know. I became a really fervent learner, became a really participant learner. And some of these teachers actually became my parents. I'll always say that if I had this type of mentality when I was in foster care, I would only have one foster parent, because the problem with all foster parents in foster care is not that foster parents don't work. It's because kids want something different, which is their own families. So if I had been in this psychological space early where I had knew these dynamics, I would only have one foster parent who I probably would have adopted, who would have really gave me the life and the instruments that I needed to be successful. So that led me to Morehouse, that thinking and that construct. From Morehouse, it wasn't about surviving my circumstances, as we was talking about earlier. My mentor was really critical about saying, you're not trying to fix the past, you're trying to build a future. You're trying to build a new future, to create something new so that what's broken can never be allowed to happen again. So it's about really thriving in school so that you can be the best, most competent, most skilled professional and practitioner you can be afterwards. So I graduated from Morehouse at the top of my class, near the top of my class. I went to Yale Divinity School to do theological work because my major at the time was ethics. So I was practicing to be, to really like be an academic in ethics. I was in like a more professorship route. All of my years in Morehouse, I was at the Department of Education, doing work in the education field under Arne Duncan at the time. And over the years of just basically learning and growing, that led me to pursue more so a career in education, where I was going across the country, not only giving speeches about my story, but doing more so professional development training for myself so that I can do it to other school districts. And so that's why in 2017 I enrolled in Harvard for my education degree, finished and graduated in 2018. And I've basically been doing professional development and speaking engagements across the country ever since. And it's been a beautiful journey. So that's kind of where my life has taken me thus far.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. So I want to make sure we are open now to questions. If you can type a question in for Rodney into the chat window, or you can hit the Q&A button also. So Daniel Barwick is saying, Rodney, great conversation, your amazing question. Were there people with the same background as you who has the same access to the same mentor but weren't transformed?
Oh, absolutely.
And if so, is the second part of the question, if so, what do you think were the relevant variables?
So students who were in the same kind of experience or weren't transformed. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, transformation requires its own definition. And so let me just give you my perspective of what I mean when I say transformation. Transformation is basically psychologically and socially choosing to reorient yourself to produce a different outcome in your life. So basically, when you're in class and you're with that teacher that you can't stand, or you're in that school system with peers that you don't like, that you don't get along with. You're in a community that's highly volatile, that's dealing with violence or dealing with poverty, dealing with, or you're going to that household with a single parent or no parents at all, or two parents who are highly dysfunctional. You are literally choosing to adopt a different mindset and physiological outlook on how you approach these challenges and difficulties. So part of ownership or owning that process is to say, you know, I'm not going to fight my teacher today. I'm not going to fight my teacher for not wanting to be in school. It's not her fault or his fault that I don't want to be in school. I have a purpose for being able to create something radically different for my life. I'm purposeful now. So I have to really be about the business of learning so that I can produce the outcome that I want. So that requires me to walk different. It requires me to actually stay after school and to learn this material with my peers, somebody who's knowledgeable about it, talk to my teachers about what it is that I need to learn, what I need to do different to get an A in this class. So the A is more like a means to a greater purpose. It's not just because you're trying to appease teachers, it's really because you're really on the campaign to produce a radically different lifestyle. So I gotta actually be with my teacher, to collaborate, to be a partner with my teacher, to be a partner with the facilitators in my school. I have to go back to that 13-year-old who was psychologically abused by a mom who said I couldn't be anything, to a father who abused me way too early when I was 5 years old or 6 years old, just because I didn't take out the trash or whatever, or I didn't do the dishes. I got to go back to that uncle who sexually abused me and who didn't apologize for it and who's still around to this day. I got to go back and say, forgive myself for tearing my life apart as a way to survive that psychologically and socially, but I also have to find a way to forgive him by choice, not necessarily by action, but by choice. And so in reorienting yourself in all these different ways, you create a different energy. That energy, some people call humility and vulnerability, to be able to allow the right people to come into your life to help you in the ways that you need to be helped. That's that business partner who's at that venture capital firm in New York. That's that mom who really cares about kids on the south, west, or north side of Chicago, who really is about the business of helping kids to achieve their best life, but can't because the kids are so resentful. So they just now met a kid who's now humble and who's willing and receptive to learn and to grow. So now they can be the parent that kid never had, right? So that's the orientation I'm talking about. And from all these different people coming into your life, you're creating a new experience and producing different work that over time is going to lead you in a different direction. Now, to that point, there are many students who went through this mentorship program that I was talking about, my mentor, who did not reap those results because of a couple reasons. But the first reason is that the pain was way too deep. Right? It takes a lot to ask someone who's been sexually abused by their uncle at 5 years old or 6 or 7, that you have to own that. Just think about like putting yourself in the space of saying that to somebody, and then put yourself in the space of somebody who went through it and them trying to own that. I mean, the gravity of trauma actually matters in terms of your ability to be able to be transformed and to reorient yourself. Transformation is just a reorientation. So it's just, if you can't reorient yourself from that experience, everybody can understand it. But in fact, everybody couldn't do that and didn't do that. And so that's where the casualties really come into play. Then the other reason is because is that there is a such thing as inherent willpower and motivation to do different, to succeed. It's one thing if you're going through trouble and you just need somebody to help you. It's another thing if you are having an adverse lifestyle and experience and a part of you likes it. A part of you is actually predisposed to it, and actually you have an appetite for it, right? That makes this work so much harder, because not only are you trying to help somebody to reframe how they think about their trauma, but then you have to convince them that it's not normal and they shouldn't want it, because subconsciously they're appetizing for it. So they actually do things that bring them more to it. So those two things is what enables some of us to be able to thrive, and some of us to be able to just survive, and then others to just not be able to be transformed at all, if that makes sense. Yeah. I can go so much deep into that, by the way. And I am actually, because I'm writing a book called Wounds You Cannot See. But the gravity of trauma has those kind of layers that prevent everybody from being able to be transformed as away from the experience. Even though the method, by the way, brings you to that point of transformation. It's just those variables that you can't avoid.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, and I there's some more questions coming up here, Rodney, but, I'm convinced that the successful entrepreneur is nothing more than an ordinary person with a compelling goal. And one of the things that keeps coming up in your conversation is like the entrepreneurial experience allowed you to see some kind of clarity about a compelling future, which then enables you to reorient your mind and say, I'm not going to fight with the teacher. I'm not going to, like as Churchill said, I'm not going to stop and throw stones at every dog I encounter that barks at me along the way to where I'm going. Right. So it's that, maybe one of the distinguishing factors is that you have clarity on where you're going. Like you've got the compelling goal.
Trauma-informed education says, this is how I can be resilient. But entrepreneurship education says, this is how I can win. It's two totally different mindsets. But if you put them both together, you have literally an unstoppable force, right?
That's good.
Focused on winning, but when life throws the inevitable obstacles your way, you have the resiliency necessary to keep persevering and going forward, right? I learned how to be resilient before I learned how to win. So that's when entrepreneurship education really put on like that icing on the cake, so to speak. That is what made me today, right? Because resilience without the winning mentality that entrepreneurship gave me, and not to make light of this, by the way, but resiliency without the entrepreneurial mindset probably would have got me through community college into maybe a 4-year college and university at a state level. And then just like, working for somebody else at a 9-to-5 job. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but working for somebody else at a 9-to-5 job, just making,
it's not as compelling,
as comfortable as possible for myself and the people I care about, which is great. But the entrepreneurship mindset really gave me a winning mentality, more of like an ambitious mentality that, why do I have to just settle for being comfortable? I would like to be great. I would like to win. I would like to own. I would like to be able to build. I would like to manifest. I don't want to just have wealth and prosperity and abundance and happiness for myself. I want to be a producer, to have it abundantly for those that I care about and those, around the world. So I have the potential through entrepreneurship to do that. So that gave me almost it gave me this really relentless appetite to be the very, very best version of myself, if that makes sense. When you're dealing with resilience and trauma-informed education, you're trying to put the right systems and psychological processes in place to withstand adversity. Because if you went through trauma, you always go through relapses. There's never going to be a time when you go to sleep in your lifetime where you don't have a dream about the worst thing that happened to you. You were abused yesterday. It's 20 years from now. One day you're going to have a dream. You're going to wake up and sweat because you have that same dream 20 years, 20 years later. So it's always going to happen. So resiliency allows you to say, oh, this was just a dream. I'm not that same person who I was 20 years ago who manifests this adverse lifestyle from that traumatic event. Entrepreneurship education is different from that, because not only does it teach you, not only is it just about resilience, but it's about, you can literally reframe that same experience that broke you into a product, a service, a psychological, social framework that helps you capitalize on your life experience, because capitalization is a real thing in this country. So it's saying that I was actually abused. There are about 100,000 victims of this type of abuse. They will be helped because of my example. Like, that's being the very best version of yourself. And that's what entrepreneurship education does. Taking risks, being able to capitalize on that is a manifestation of what entrepreneurship education gives you in the long term.
Beautiful, beautiful. Rodney, Robert Greene, who's a Ice House facilitator, is saying life circumstances have shaped at-risk students, has them thinking and moving in certain directions, with many convinced that they do not have a choice in the matter. Today and in the future, what is the biggest challenge educators face when attempting to get at-risk students to realize they have a choice?
I do think that, and me and Gary, we've talked about this so much. We can't, having the choice in a matter is not the same thing as doing what makes sense, both consciously and subconsciously in given situations. And it just, obviously it makes sense. I'm speaking to the choir, but to make it very practical, coming from waking up at 7:30 a.m. to get to a shower that's extremely cold because you don't have heat, to then putting on clothes that you wore the day before because you don't have a washing machine or you don't have transportation to a laundromat, to a mom who doesn't see why you even going to school because she doesn't really see the potential that you have, who's also strung out on drugs herself. not having the father to be able to make sure you walk down the street and get to school safely because he's in jail, because he went through those barriers and dysfunction or whatever. But that's not what you're thinking about. You're just thinking about he's not there. And you're walking down the street and you actually see alcoholics at the drugstore at 7:30 a.m. because they usually are lined up by 6 a.m. around the corner. So you're seeing that, and then you're seeing needles, and you're seeing cigarette butts, and you're seeing Swisher sweet packets on the ground, and grass that's not even tethered. Like, no one comes to even mow the grass. You know, there's no such thing as community maintenance because no one pays property taxes in the neighborhood, so that doesn't happen. But you get to the school, and then you deal with about 25 to 35 teachers, educators who understand those variables, are not living in your neighborhood. And not only are they not living in your neighborhood, they also share the same subconscious perspective that everybody else shares, which is that these kids are just destined for failure. And so they act like that. Yeah. Or maybe they convince themselves that they don't think that like that, but subconsciously and pragmatically, they treat kids like that. So you're dealing with that. And then you meet that one educator who doesn't have the time or the energy or the money to commit to making you think you have a choice, tell you have a choice. And then when you hear that you have a choice, you cognitively say, you know what, I do have a choice. I can go to college. I can do right. I can get my life back on track. And then pragmatically, you do everything in your life for the next 23 hours that serves as a coping mechanism or survival mechanism to your daily life experience. That's when life just doesn't add up. I think that the best thing that an educator, a facilitator can do to help reorient the kid, to make sure that they know that they have a choice and actually feel it, is to do something extremely radical. You cannot have money without sacrificing something. And most of the time it's time. And so if you don't have money and you sacrifice a whole lot of time, I think that that's one of the most important things that you can do to help kids to genuinely be able to turn the wheels in a different direction. And I don't really mean to emphasize the time that much because it's just one piece of the puzzle. But my mentor, Mr. McGrone, having all the dynamics that he had, invested something like 12 to 14 hours every day in this mentorship program. I mean, from the time he got to school at 6 a.m. to the time he left the school at about 8:30 p.m. when we were done with our mentorship program, because it was only supposed to go until 4 or 5. He was into 8:30 because there was some of us who just needed more time. He did that, and on the weekends, by the way, to help facilitate that engagement, that ongoing engagement that kept our minds busy and in a space where we couldn't get into trouble, where we couldn't relapse, where we couldn't revert back to those adverse coping mechanisms. He sacrificed that time to put in that investment to help us do what we did. As a result, you can't have that type of radical transformation without having an extreme sacrifice, and a sacrifice which nobody will probably recognize or talk about. And that, where was his time with his kids? He had 3 kids at home, by the way. You know, a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, I think. Had a wife at home, you know, just waiting every day. And his wife could have easily said, what the hell? Like, you give your time to these kids, like, you need to come home, right? But he said, no, we have to do this. We got to do this for these kids, right? And so he was there all the time. And as a result, it sacrificed his marriage. As a result, it sacrificed his ability to be able to pay his bills successfully because he wasn't doing other things. It sacrificed even his social emotional well-being because he was taking on the weight of the problems of all of us. And as a result, we got better and we did what we did. So you can't have your cake and eat it too when it comes to making a radical and revolutionary transformation like that. And so I think that, to answer the question directly, one of the main things that facilitators can do is, one, give the proper time that you don't have. So to even have to ask for that is extremely hard, even for me, but to do that first, and then to put in the proper investment in place, because a lot of it is, after that, is just the mechanics, having the right skill sets and the right programs in place to help kids reframe their adversity in the proper way. And it's not going to happen overnight, obviously. It takes sometimes months or sometimes years, even just to get a kid to say, you know what, you said I have a choice, but from your example, like the Freedom Riders, by the way, in California, you said I have a choice, but now I really believe I have a choice. And so with your help, I actually think I can do this. And they might not say it, but ultimately I think that they'll do it with that proper facilitation and guidance, right? So that's the real thing. The mentor is like the training wheels. And I don't know if you need training wheels for 6 months as a young person who's dealing with all this adversity or whatever. I don't know if you need training wheels for 6 months or a year, but eventually that facilitator with that proper, him being the training wheels, he'll be able to take them off. And when he takes them off, you'll be able to ride on your own. But, you know, you can't expect just a person to just pick up a bike and just ride if you've never ridden a bike before. You're asking somebody to do something radically different from what they know. You're asking an elephant to climb a monkey tree. You just, you know, that's how it feels. So you have to be able to put in that deep investment over a long period of time sometimes to even be able to get that message across. And then the real work begins after that. So that's how hard that work is, I believe.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Rodney. And I just want to kind of pile on there just briefly that Albert Bandura's work in self-efficacy, you can Google search guided mastery. And he's done a lot of research at Stanford to sort of talk about how to move someone from a helpless towards a mastery orientation. And he identifies 4 key elements. The first is you need to have some small win. You need to feel the bat hit the ball. You need to see your grades going up a little bit. You need to see the effort lead to some kind of positive outcome. It's the first thing. The second thing you need people who believe in you. You need someone challenging you to dig deeper, like the mentor you talked about. Bender also says that the third thing you need are relatable social models. You need to see people who come from similar or worse circumstances succeeding in this domain. And then lastly, which you spoke about at length, Rodney, is you need the ability to manage your emotions. You need to make up your mind. I'm not going to throw the stone at every dog that barks at me. I got a mission. I'm going somewhere. I'm not going to fight with the teacher. I'm going to get up I'm going to get the basics down, and I'm going to make this work for me.
Right.
So just to pile onto that question, like look up Albert Bandura. Guided mastery is the subject matter. So Stella is asking, thanks, Rodney. How would you cope teaching skills in a school when you are not expected to relate to the students personally, but through schoolwork only? There's a misunderstanding that entrepreneurship education does not teach skills if there are no skill acquisition centers. I'm not sure I understand the question, but
So first of all, in context to relationship though, there's 2 ways to build a relationship. There's a relationship from the optics of identity, which I was talking about earlier, identity and representation. And then there's the relationship as a confine of time and space. So basically, I can become your friend if I spend enough time with you, if I talk enough to you, if I converse enough with you, if we have more meaningful experiences together over a extended period of time, however long that takes. That sense of familiarity, that commitment to you, that conviction to you, to our relationship is really going to read into a very healthy relationship. Then there's the relationship where, you know, I really want to be a bodybuilder. And so now my school brings in a bodybuilder. And I'm just like, my God, that is a great bodybuilder. And I want to be like that one day. So now I'm taking it upon myself to study you, to actually like be under your tutelage, to go to your competitions or whatever. So that it's a relationship as a manifestation of optical identity and relatability. Just because I want to be a bodybuilder and you're not a bodybuilder, don't mean that you can't spend the time, have the commitment, have the conviction, and to be able to produce and help create those meaningful experiences that is going to make me gravitate to you as a human being. Because once I see that you care, once I see that you're investing and learning about me and my experiences, and that you know how to, and that you know my limitations and my strengths, and you're truly invested time, energy-wise, to be able to help me be the very best version of myself through that space and that time commitment, I think that we'll be friends over a long period of time. So in that respect, I don't think that that lack of identity relatability makes as much of a difference. But like I said, that identity relatability makes it happen quicker if you have it, right? I'm a bodybuilder, I'm doing this, but not only do I have that, but I'm also investing in the time to learn you, to build a relationship with you. That's incredibly different, right? Makes sense. So I think that a lot of school systems that don't prioritize this, by the way, when they see kids, students struggling with academics, with social and emotional skills, they don't take the time to put in practitioners whose sole job is to work with students on that, partly because they take it for granted, partly because it's not really connected to the formal aspect of the education system in this country. So that makes sense how schools don't really invest in those kind of processes. That's why, like I said before, it takes a radical educator inside the school or outside the school, but really in the school, if you want to like make it pragmatic, to be able to do it on their own. And I think that by doing it on their own, it does come with incredible risk. You can risk getting fired, like my mentor did. His job was not to stay with us until 8:30. It was not to work with us on our issues around our fathers not being there, our mothers being drug addicts, or our communities being riddled with violence. That was not his job. His job was to catch kids in school when they actually acted up, put them in suspension or detention, and if they continue to act up, recommend them for expulsion. That was his only job. So the fact that he went beyond that and did something completely radical by instituting community service, by talking to us about social emotional issues, by making us do these activities to extract what our true problems were, and then putting a plan in place to do something different, was not his job, and was part and partial the reason why he got fired. Because from a system protocol standpoint, our school recognized that as a deviation from what it is that he needed to do. You're not giving enough time to your job because you're doing this. So by default, my school was like, listen, this is too radical for us. We need to go ahead and do something different. We need a true dean, a dean who is just in charge of disciplining, suspending kids, and the like. You can't be taking kids into the neighborhood and having conversations with drug addicts in the neighborhood. You can't do that. That's too risky. You can't bring homeless people in the school on Saturdays and Sundays and feed them food because they're hungry. That's too risky. Anything can come in our school. Diseases, so many things, right? But I had a radical leader who said, forget all. I'm going to forget it. In order to have what you want, you have to do what you've never done with. And so that's what he did. And as a result, he paid the price. And so I don't see any way around it unless the system changes, which I don't really see anytime soon. But it takes that type of fervent, resilient type of and radical approach to be able to even get the wheels turning in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, it's good. It's good, Rodney. So Rhoda Dion is asking, I'd like to know, what is your definition of success and how has it changed over time?
Yeah, I would say that my evolution of the notion of success have happened, incremental and in very, very different ways. I believed in success first when I was younger, just getting out of the South Side of Chicago. That was like success. I applied to 13 different colleges and I had got denied from all of them except one college on academic probation. And then interestingly, after I got accepted to that one college, there were other colleges that reached out to me and said, hey, we actually reconsidered your application. And so we think we want to talk to you, whatever. But by that time, I already committed to Morehouse. I just wanted to get out of Chicago and to do something different. And so it led me to Atlanta, Georgia, to Morehouse. And once I realized that being at Morehouse and being in an educational environment was not all that people made it to be, like this euphoria, that it was just an institution that was about the business of helping you, become competent in whatever profession you wanted, then I just wanted to do more than that. And so then my definition of success became to be an expert practitioner or whatever I chose to do. And so that's why I worked so hard in school. And then as I got over school and graduated from college, I realized that life wasn't all about college, because college still, even though I graduated from college near the top of my class and I got into Ivy League school, I was still in debt. So then it became more so about not just about graduating from college and being an expert practitioner, but how to put myself in a position to accumulate wealth and prosperity. And so that's when I began to think about success as the accumulation of entrepreneurial skills and endeavors that can be put together to amass great capital and wealth. So it became about money. And after that, it became about what the thing that I really think it should be about. Because as I began to focus on money, I began to focus on everybody who has money, like the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts and all these people. Then I began to realize these people don't care about money. All they care about is the preservation of time, and money is a byproduct of that. In order to have time to do the things you want to do, you have to have the resources, the resource allocation to be able to preserve it. So these wealthy individuals live their life the way they want, doing the work that they love for infinite amounts of time. They invest in their learning, literally reading like 4 or 5 hours a day, walking and doing the things that really matter in life and spending time with their families, because now money is not an issue. So it came to a point where I had to realize that, life is not just about money as a means to an end, because money is not the end. It's more so about being able to put myself in a position to go half of the day to spend with my family and the people that I care about. And so I need to build up a system, put a system in place that allows me to do that. And that's really what entrepreneurship became about. So success to me is being able to produce the most happiness in my life that I can by spending it with the people that I love and I care about. So that's what success really means to me. If you're not doing that, if you're not happy, if you're not spending it with the people you love and you care about, if you're not using your time, investing your time in doing that, then to me, that's not really the true definition of success, in my opinion. So everything that I'm doing is to be able to preserve the time that I need to be able to invest in doing the things that I truly care about, and to spend it with the people I truly care about. And that's that's a process of evolution. So to get somebody from saying, God, you living in on the south side of Chicago and you was just shot at yesterday, to get them to say, you need to focus on your happiness and spending it with the people you love and care about. That's a strong evolution to have.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely necessary to be able to have success in that way.
So Rodney, we got time for one more question from Robert Green. He's saying, you mentioned you're currently delivering professional development courses around the country. Is the entrepreneurial mindset a key aspect of this training, and how is it implemented? So I wanted to end on that question, Rodney. I'll let you answer that question, and then we'll just wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. For the last 2.5 years, I've been doing professional development, basically traveling across the country to various school districts, both public, private, charter, across the country, and delivering programs that I put in place that I've developed through my work at Harvard, and in combination with various mentors over the years, to talk about the importance of entrepreneurship education, trauma-informed education, resilience education, because resilience is a practice in and of itself, and what radical mentorship looks like. And so my professional development over the years have been catered towards that. And every year I go, and it's usually in the summers and in the fall season, I go to various school districts and I do professional development workshops and breakouts at school districts and at conventions and summits and conferences about how to institute those type of practices. And it's something I really love to do. I've been doing it for a long time so far. And so, and I continue to grow and develop those programs over time. But right now I have about 8 different workshops that I offer, all in the range of trauma-informed education, entrepreneurship education, and how to teach leadership and resilience to youth with adverse experiences. And so I do that in school districts all across the country. So it's been a really good passion of mine.
Yeah, it's a good place to end, Rodney. So, I want to end just by saying thank you for sharing this incredible story with us again. And I wanted to also ask you, Rodney, where can folks get a hold of you? But I want to make sure, and we'll post this along with your contact info. I want to make sure people understand that the power that you deliver in your keynotes and your presentations and workshops. And I wanted to say to the folks that are on this webinar that I've seen Rodney do keynotes before. There's a power, there's a humility in your delivery, there's a groundedness in your story. And if you're looking for someone to keynote or to deliver a workshop on this area, I can't recommend Rodney enough. So Rodney, thank you for your incredible insight, for your vulnerability and your strength. And so just where can people get a hold of you when they want to learn more about your story?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I appreciate that. Thanks a lot for, just being able to contribute and help me with this campaign to kind of do this New Day One campaign that I've been doing for so long. The name of my website is actually anewday1.org, but one spelled out. Anewday1.org, and that's really where you can find a lot of the programs that I do and that I offer. Along with a lot of the schedules that I have. Also, my social media pages are on there. And most of the time when I when people reach out, they reach out through the website. Of course, they reach out to you, Gary, because they know you. And then I just get people reaching out to me because they've heard you at an ICE house facilitator training, whatnot, which is always extremely helpful. And from that, we have a conversation about, what it is that they're looking for, their goals, and then what it is that they hope to achieve either with their staff or with their students, which I've been very privileged to do. And so a combination of my story, a combination of my age, and a combination of where I am in my life and what I've built over the years have put me in a position to be able to do this work. And I'm very honored to do it. But I always am quick to mention to people who ask me about the notion of transformation. Again, if you ask me what's different in my life, it's not a lot that's truly different in respect of my blueprint. Because, again, my parents, they still struggle with the abnormalities of the drug addictions that they faced over the years. And, I go back to Chicago, and my neighborhood, it's still poverty, it's still violence. I still deal with that post-traumatic stress disorder. There's times when I get very, very angry. Sometimes you can hear it come out in the inflection of my voice. I go back to the place where I don't want to go. So in terms of this notion of transformation, a trauma-informed education, healing, there's no real notion of healing. What there is was reprogramming. And from that respect, you have to be very careful about that notion because, this is something that I'll deal with for my whole life, right? This notion of post-traumatic stress disorder, the wounds you cannot see. The only thing that we're talking about today and the thing that matters the most is mindset. Is how to reframe the mindset and make people deliberately choose change. And that's really what my campaign has been about. And that's what I'm really passionate about doing. And that's what I call my call to action is that we're not looking to fix what's broken. We're looking to create something new so that what's broken can never be allowed to happen ever again. And so that's really what has allowed me to thrive, I believe, from then on, and I believe in the years to come. So I really appreciate the support that you guys have given me over the years. I really appreciate it.
That's great, Rodney. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar. We'll make this recording available. We'll send it all to all of you as a recorded webinar. We'll post it on the Eli Facebook page. Rodney will post it on his Facebook page. You can find us on social media. Rodney, thank you again for this fabulous conversation. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thanks so much.